In this video, I want to get this Amiga 4000 that I've been dying to have running on my bench up and running and ready to go. So I repaired the Amiga 2500 first just because I thought it would be an easier repair. May not have been right about that, but I have had a lot of resistance to doing a lot of setup on it just because it's going to my buddy Tom. He's going to want to reset everything up himself. And I know this 4000 would be going on my bench soon. So let's get it going so I can get it going. So this is going to be my main daily use machine up until I can get the 3000 working, and that is a when and if and years kind of thing. So I really want to get this going. I've been dying to get to it, but you know, the Stone collection's kind of taken my time for a while here lately. So we have the main machine, the 4000. So I probably won't do the Video Toaster 4000 in this yet. I need to have the right video equipment for it, so I can't test it, which is really annoying. There is some old security video stuff in with the Stone collection, so I'm hoping that will work for this. I think it might. In the meantime, I'm gonna open this up, see how it looks. All right, so just in the short time I've been taking some shots of this thing, it's stuck to the bench, so these feet have got to go. They are so sticky. It is nice to see that the keys are still here, probably right where they were delivered when new, I'm assuming. So let's go ahead and pull off the covers, see what we find. I've been in so many machines before, I don't remember exactly what the state of this one was, so I'm gonna have to take a quick peek. All right, so need to clean up the residue. Gonna need to recap this board, and some of those caps are leaking because they're on back asswards. And then recap this board, all these nasty surface mount pieces of junk. So let's take it apart and lay it out so we can start the restoration. So just gonna clean up some of these goobers with a scratch pen, and looks like I'm going to need to remove the pins first. Obviously heat that up and pull it through. Yeah. Since I cut the battery off, there's just little shards left to pull out. I don't know why, but I just feel like this board is the luckiest board alive. Or, and technically it's still alive. But this was just on the edge of starting to cause some serious damage, but it did not. So now I have the laborious job of removing the remaining corrosion. You can see there's just a tiny bit, couple spots right there. It's going to take a while, so I am not going to record it. I'll show it to you when it's ready. Cleaned up the corrosion around the battery and cleaned up some traces here, but they looked fine. And I've removed some caps in the area and that got me off on a little bit of a tangent. One of the things that's bugged me is the whole removing of surface mounted caps, and that is not something I ever dealt with back in the day. They were just kind of coming into as I was going out. So it's not something I ever had to touch once. And I'm going to talk about some of the ways of removing surface mounted caps I've played with, and what I've kind of settled on just now as kind of a final decision on what I'm going to do unless I run into trouble with it in the future. If you saw my Mac SE30 restoration, I was using the twist method. And after messing around with this, I think that method's probably pretty safe. It's not what I'm going to use for emotional reasons. It just feels wrong. But it involves taking a pair of needle nose pliers, getting a good grip on the cap, twisting it, and pulling it off the board. It'll leave the leads behind. And so there's that way. I've seen people using 2 soldering irons, where if this is 2 soldering irons, you just get in there, heat up both of them, and then pull it off. That looks great, but I don't have 2 decent soldering irons. I have 1 decent soldering iron and 1 crappy soldering iron. I gave my old soldering iron to my nephew, so I don't have that anymore. Another method that looks interesting, but I don't want to buy the equipment, uses a dual-headed soldering iron, literally a soldering tweezers that lets you heat up, grab, lift. That would be great, but I'm not going out and buying a bunch of soldering tweezers. Now, the method I'm going to use, I honestly cannot remember where I saw it at. If I can find it, I'll put it up here on the screen. I think it might have been Chris Edwards or RMC The Cave. So this is what I've settled on. It seems to work fairly well, and it seems to have pretty low risk. So the first thing you do is you take a pair of cutters, and these are my sacrificial cutters. You can see that they've seen better days. Get in above this black rim, right around where that ring is, and just cut through the cap. So you're going to kill the cap. Once you've done that, there is this little piece sitting right here that's got a liner, the bottom of the metal part, and just peel that off. You can see that just has a couple holes, and there were 2 little tiny leads sticking through that. Actually, one of them's broken off. So then, this bottom piece of plastic sitting here, if it'll come off, you can peel it off. If it won't come off, all you have to do is get in here and cut that lead. Cover it so it doesn't go flying. In this case, it didn't go flying, but I couldn't do that with the camera there. Then this piece will just come right off, and what you're left with is the 2 metal leads soldered down, which you can then easily remove. So this feels to me, and yeah, sometimes on stuff like this, we can't do giant studies, so we just got to do what we can. But this feels very safe for the pads on the board. And the pads on the board can take a bit, but if they've had leaking cap on them, they may be weakened. So then get in there, heat that up, and just release these pads. Once they're off of there, then we can just take some soldering braid. When you're cleaning up pads with soldering braid, it actually works better if you use some braid that's fairly saturated with solder already. Not so saturated it can't take anything, but you want to leave a tinned pad behind. So now, just hit this with a little bit of the alcohol, and we have a couple beautiful pads ready to tin and put new caps onto. And just for the record, normally I remove 1 cap and then replace it, and then remove 1 cap and then replace it. So what I've been taking off now are all 47/16s, 47 microfarad, 16 volt. So I don't have to worry that I put the wrong cap in the wrong spot. I will go ahead and use this same method to take the rest of the 47/16s off, and then I will go ahead and install them all, and then I'll start on another cap value. So let's try this one here. It's a little less accessible, so that might make it a little trickier. I'm going to turn the board this way. So we get in here. Cut through the cap. Pull off the bottom piece of the cap, and that comes off readily. Cut the two leads. Pull off the plastic base. In this case, in two pieces. I'm just using the surface tension on the iron. Put a little flux on there. Using the tension on the iron to just grab a hold of this piece off of here. So once it melts, it just sticks to the iron quite conveniently. And some of you may have noticed from earlier, I've switched tips on my iron. I like this sharp bent one for getting into the surface mount caps. So that is something that you just gotta get used to, is changing changing iron tips. You know, back in the day, I had a tendency to be lazy and just use a generic basic tip for everything, but boy, this is a lot easier when you use the right tool for the job. I kind of have two opposing sayings that I use on the family all the time. It's like, one is make do with what you have, and one is use the right tool for the job. And depending upon the situation, just pick whichever one you want, because both of them are valid. But there we have it. Nice, clean, ready for a new capacitor. And as you saw, that was in real time. It's very quick. I'm going to finish removing all the caps from this board, and then I'll be back to show you the results. So I've gotten all the 4716s off of here, so now it's time to replace them. Just do one cap value at a time, so I don't have to worry about getting them in the wrong spot. I'll go ahead and pull out. These are all the parts to go on this board. Whoops. Well, that was silly. Fortunately, I caught them in my lap. What I'm going to do is going to put a tiny bit of flux on each of these pads. And then I am going to tin them with a little bit of solder. The caps are marked with a black mark on the negative contact. And the board is marked with the positive contact. So just be careful, take your time, and be aware that not all caps have the exact same markings. Some caps, tantalums come to mind, can be marked the opposite way. They can be marked on the positive. I want the marked side away from the positive mark, and I'm going to hold them with a pair of tweezers. And then I need to make sure that my iron makes contact with the lead on the cap. This is hard to do around a camera. I've got it a little crooked, so I'll just reheat it for a second. Repin it down. Make sure the cap's fully seated down on the board. It tends to sit up on that. I put a little too much solder on there. There you go. Negative that way, positive that way. Cap is firmly attached. And we will do this for all of these. All right, so that's one down. 9 more of these 4716s to go, and then I will get back to you when I'm done with that. All right, and there are all the 4716s in place. After replacing all the remaining capacitors using the exact same method, I went ahead and installed a battery holder to replace the lithium battery with a coin cell, which won't leak. So next step, ultrasonic cleaner. Well, the main board has taken its bath in the ultrasonic cleaner. It's time to get started on the processor board. This heat sink's got to come off. It's overhanging a couple of the caps that I need to replace, and it's got a ton of thermal compound on it. Now that we've got the heat sink off of here, what we need to deal with is the capacitors on this board. And one of the things that I've never encountered before, but I've seen many reports of on this board, is that 3 of the capacitors are on backwards. Now, we can tell C102 here is on correctly according to the documentation I've read, and I'll put a link in the description. So if I go to the negative lead of this capacitor, and then I go to C402A, this is C402E, this is C402A. As you can see, we have virtually no resistance. The ground, they're both on the ground, that makes sense. But if I go to C107 here, so ground to ground, I have an open loop. I have no conductivity. But if I go to the positive side of this cap, okay, so clearly one of these 2 caps is backwards, and somebody else has done the work for us to let us know that C105, C106, and C107 are on the board backwards, and the silk screen on the board is wrong, which is how they ended up backwards at the factory. So when we remove these 3 caps, we're going to need to reattach the new ones with the negative stripe towards the positive mark on the board, because the positive mark on the board is wrong. Good job, Commodore. I know mistakes happen, but you're supposed to catch them in production. So what I'll be doing here now is we will remove all these capacitors. They are all 22 microfarads, 16 volts, so they're all the same. I've got these 3. Then I'll resolder on the 2 correct ones first, and then the 3 bad ones next. So I'll start by doing the same snip method I did on the other board. And if you need to, make sure you take notes of which caps are bad and which are good. In this case, I can revert back to the footage. So this cap was kind of hard to get to, but it's still cut off enough to pull right off of there. And I think the fact that that's that easy is kind of an indicator why the twist method seems to work perfectly fine for people as well. You know, the best way to do something like this is the way that works for you. All right, so that came right off. It doesn't look like it's lifted the pads. On inspection of this board, I did notice that the 3 leaking caps were corroded a lot more, or the area around them corroded a lot more than the 2 good caps or the caps on the other board. See how corroded that area is. That resistor is going to need to be cleaned up and reflowed as well. So this one needs to be snipped a little bit, looks like. So let's see what happens when we clean this up. It may not be a lot of fun. Putting flux everywhere I'm going to need to clean up, not just on the pads. So the leads are still in place on the 2 caps that were incorrectly. That was, they were in correctly, not incorrectly. Does that make sense? By trying to add a little bit of solder to this board. And for the record, yes, this does stink. If I wasn't filming, I would have a fan running up here pulling that out of my face. Added solder. Now time for some wick. Same old process as before. Wow. I don't know if you guys can see how much this is smoking, but that's just because of all the nasty crap on the board. I'm going to have to figure out a camera-friendly way to have a fume extractor going. I am surprised and somewhat pleased at the condition of these pads. They are better than I thought they were going to be. Taking a look. I need to clean this up still, but those pads are all still there. As much as I would love to run this board through the ultrasonic cleaner, if I were to run it even briefly, I'd lose all the labels on the gals, and I don't want to lose those. So this is all being cleaned by hand. It won't be as pretty as the main board, but it will do the trick. Gonna give this a minute to allow the alcohol to evaporate before I hit it with heat, and then we'll solder them on. Okay, so now the caps. I'm gonna start with the two that are good. And particularly this one up here, because it's going to be really hard to get to. So we're going with the correct polarity. The CPU is really in the way. Okay, next will be this one here, also on the correct way. Or they'll all be on the correct way, but these two are going to match the silk screen on the board. Okay, so now the next three are going to go with the negative stripe to the positive marking on the board. And you get it towards the plus silk screen. I know. I'll edit all this out, but I gotta be so careful. It's such a habit to put them on the right way. And as I worked on the main board, I was so careful to double and triple check. So now intentionally putting them opposite of what I've been doing is very difficult. All right, so now for a check. We should have continuity between all of the caps on their negative and negative as the cap is marked leads. So there we go. Caps are no longer backwards. And I definitely need some practice with the mounting of surface mount caps. They're just not perfectly straight, but I'm doing the best I can. I can't do no better. This board needs a little bit of cleaning and then some thermal paste. Now, as he would say, I need the perfect amount of thermal paste. I just want a good distribution here. It will spread properly as the heat sink makes contact. So once this is on here, that should spread quite nicely, and indeed it has. We'll add liquid. So at this point I realize this video is getting to be way too long. Not only do I still have to recap the daughter board and the power supply, I've still got the keyboard and mouse to deal with. There's also floppy drive and all kinds of other bits and bobs. I need to clean the case, get it going, and I need to set it up to use. So as soon as the next part is ready, I'll link it right here. And in the meantime, check out this video where I got these Amigas in the first place.